We got into a very interesting Gemara. All Gemaras are interesting, but some on the surface you see it even more. And we mentioned a Breita. We mentioned a Breita that talks about not filling up your pot. A lady shouldn't fill up a pot with beans. On Friday, we said on Yudchet Amabez 18b1, and we said she shouldn't do that, and also she should not a baker. Lo Yamali Nachdom. We'll go back to that piece over here on 18b1. Mantana Lahodatana Rabban on the first column. Who's the author to that which the rabbis taught? Letamali Isha Kedera Asasios. Asasios. A lady should not fill up a pot with or turmusin, all different types of beans. The Taniach Zachatana Erev Shabbat Im Chashechan, to place it into the oven before Shabbat. We said these beans take a long time, to more than 24 hours to be ready. So he can't do that. And if he went ahead and he did it the Motzei Shabbat, I mean, if the lady did it the Motzei Shabbat, assume the amount of time that he's gaining by doing this sin, he can't benefit. So if he gained 24 hours because he did the preparation by putting it in before Shabbat, he would have to wait another 24 hours after Shabbat to use it. So it shouldn't be a gain. We don't want the guy to gain from doing a sin, and that will hopefully deter him from doing it in the future. Similarly, the Breita says, a baker should not place a barrel of water, and placed the barrel of water into the oven on Friday afternoon, late in the day before sunset. And if he did it, also, he would not be able to benefit, by the fact that he placed this water into the oven, and he has some gain now that the water was boiled up, and whatever amount of time he had to gain for the fact that it was in the oven over Shabbat. So he would have to go ahead. Let's say it takes a certain amount of hours for that big barrel of water to be ready. Good morning, Asaf. So he will go ahead, and he's not allowed to benefit. He can't use that water until the amount of time that it took that he benefited from that action, until that amount of time passes, and then he can benefit from that water. Is that clear, Adam? Now, and again, the Motzei has to wait. Lema Beishamai v'lo Beitila. The Gemara was thinking that who's the author of this Breita? Who's the author that says you can't fill up the pot with beans and put it into the oven before Shabbat, or you can't go ahead and fill up the barrel with water and place it in the oven before Shabbat? What's the issue? What's the concern? So the Gemara is thinking that most probably it sounds like the Shammai's issue, that he's worried about your utensils working for you on Shabbat. Your beans are being cooked for you on Shabbat. And even though you're not cooking them on Shabbat because you did your action before Shabbat, you placed it into the oven before Shabbat. I'm not doing it. But the same way my animal can't work for me, my oven is working for me. And maybe that is the concern of Beit Shammai. And maybe that's why it says it can't be done, right? That's perhaps the reason why it can't be done. Because according to Beit Hillel, what's the problem? There's no problem for my utensils to work for me on Shabbat, according to Beit Hillel, right? I'm not doing it. My utensils are doing it. But what would be the concern? Now, we brought up the question yesterday, but we said, according to Beit Shammai, good morning, Emmanuel. We said, according to Beit Shammai, how does Beit Shammai ever have a lantern work on Shabbat? Right? So we said that Beit Shammai, how does he have a lantern work for Shabbat? We said because the Beis Din, the court, makes it hefker, or the court makes it hefker, or gives up ownership in the lantern before Shabbat, and therefore it's not like his lantern that's working for him, right? If it's available for anybody to take, it's not his. Good morning, Ralph.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. So why can't, if that's the case, so why don't we say the same thing about the barrel of water in the oven? And anyone could take at least the container. Officially, the container. Now you're asking a good question. If I own the light and the container is meaning what is the container that is doing work for me on Shabbat when I have a lantern that has oil and a wick and a flame? It's contained in some sort of container. Call it the lantern. So according to Beis Shammai would say you have to either before Shabbat say I give up ownership of the lantern. Let's say he said it. I don't. This lantern belongs to the world. Now maybe to answer your question a little bit, we're talking about it's made out of, let's say, earthenware. Morning, Simon. And earthenware is very inexpensive. It's not like when we think about things, we think about expensive utensils. So a person would not mind, let's say, giving up a utensil, a lantern, right? So, or the court, the Jewish court actually, in order to help the people, they create this hefker. They make this your lantern ownerless, and to help you, to enable you to be able to have that lantern running on Shabbat. According to Beis Shammai, because if you can't have your utensil running for you on Shabbat, so you'll be stuck. The rabbis, according to Beis Shammai, would give this would have the power, according to some people, it's the rabbis or he himself, to make it ownerless. And the same thing with the barrel of beer, right? We said that there's a soaking of the beer that takes 8 days, and it's soaking over Shabbat. So according to Beis Shammai, how would you allow that? You can't have your utensils working for you. So again, the barrel will be hefker. The barrel will be ownerless. Therefore, it's not my barrel.
So how do you say? You just say it out loud. This is not my barrel anymore. This is my lantern.
Right. So the question is, do you have to actually say it out loud in front of 3 people? Some might say that. Some might just say that. Tosfos says you don't. It sounds like you would not need. Maybe there'll be allowances that this ownerless might not require in front of 3 people, might require less, but somehow it has to be made, affected that it's ownerless. That this barrel, according to Beis Shammai, can't be working for me on Shabbat. So we said, what about if you say it's the rabbis that are the ones that make the utensil ownerless, and therefore the person is not in violation of his utensil working for Shabbat. So we said, why wouldn't the rabbis make ownerless the barrel, the oven, or that he's using for making these the water, to boil up the water, or to making the beans? So we said the rabbis will only go ahead and make ownerless a utensil when it's needed for the Shabbat. But the beans that are not needed, you don't need to go ahead and make the beans over Shabbat. In contrast to the beer, there's no way that you can have the beer. The beer has to soak for 8 days. So therefore, the rabbis will be happy to help you out. But when you don't need to, good morning. But when you don't need to, the rabbis are not going to make ownerless automatically the guy's oven, the guy's when it's not for the use of when it's not needed for the Shabbat. Just because he wants to have his water after Shabbat, the baker wants to have his water. He wants to make his bagels Saturday night, right after Shabbat. So he's leaving it, but he let him put up the water after Shabbat. He doesn't need. It's not a must that it has to be in the oven over Shabbat. So the Gemara says that not necessarily that it has to be Beit Shammai. And the Gemara introduces a very important concept that we deal with on a regular Shabbat. What is that? The concern, good morning, Ronnie. The concern that makes sure, how do we protect that you do not stoke the coals on Shabbat? That we have a situation on Shabbat. If you put up food, let's say if someone puts up food an hour before Shabbat on a fire, on an open flame, and the flame is not covered with a blech, there's a concern that a person might go ahead and stoke those coals on Shabbat because you might want to hurry up the cooking process. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
And you might come to stoke the coals. So therefore, the Gemara says that this issue that you can't go ahead and place the beans in the oven before Shabbat, or place the barrel of water. The baker can't place the barrel of water in the oven before Shabbat. Even Beit Hillel could agree to that. Why? Afilu tem Beit Hillel zeira shema yachte bekachalin. Maybe you're going to go ahead and stoke the coals because these require a lot of coal energy. These require a lot of because you took these beans which take at least 24 hours to cook, or this big barrel of water, and you're a baker and it needs a lot of time in the oven. Therefore, we are concerned that you're going to go ahead and stoke those coals. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, ihachi. Now that we're introducing, we are now on 18b1 on the right column. If we're introducing the issue that you're afraid of stoking the coals, so mugma v'gofrit nami ligzor. The case that we said that if you could go ahead and place the herbs, the spices in a pot, in a boiling pot, and on top of the pot you have your garments, that you want it to be, you want the fragrance from the spices to go into the, into the garments, or you have sulfur and you burn the sulfur because you want the color, the darkness from the pot to go into the things that you engraved into the silver utensils. And we said you could do that. The Bright that stated, as long as you did it before Shabbat, you placed the herbs in the pot and the spices in the pot to make the fragrance to the garments, or to sulfurate the utensils. As long as you did it before that, you started the process before Shabbat. Even though the process continues on Shabbat, we said it's fine. It's not a problem. If that's not why is that not a problem? Why aren't you concerned for the stoking of coals? If he goes ahead and he has this fire, he has this pot of spices, and he might, and the Gemara is thinking, where is the pot? The pot is in the morning, Nathan. The pot is in the oven. What else you got in the oven? Or it's on an open. There's coals in the oven, or whatever. You're heating it up in a way that there should be a concern of maybe you are, let's say, you're going to stoke it. Even let's say that however this oven is, you have coals. Let's say it's not, or it's on a fire, and then you have the pan on top of the fire, and then you have the garments on top, where you have the silver utensils on top that you want that it's become blackened from the sulfur. So why are you afraid that you're going to stoke those coals? So the Gemara said, Hatam lo machtelu. You're not going to go ahead and stoke the coals. Why not? Because the imachti solak bul kutra. Because the smoke, if you stoke the coals, you're going to create a smoke, and that smoke would be not good. More detrimental. That's the right word. Detrimental for the clothing that I have on top to receive the fragrance from the spices, or it'll be detrimental for the silver utensil that I have on top that I want it to be filled that I'm putting on, that I'm sulfurating. So therefore, you don't have to be afraid that the guy's going to stoke the coals, because it's going to be detrimental to the process. So the Gemara says, Unin shel pishtan. But when I have the case of the pot, the bundles of flax, that, the Gemara said, you put the bundles of flax. Let's look back at the case. Unin shel pishtan, into an oven. When you wanted the flax to get whitened from the heat of the oven, so you would place the flax into the oven, and Beit Hillel says, as long as you place the flax, the bundles of flax, in the oven before Shabbat, and it's going to get the heat of the oven is going to whiten the flax, you're good. So the Gemara says, well, why aren't you afraid of the stoking of the coals? So the Gemara says, Hatam kivan de kashilu zika. If you open up the oven and a draft would come in, and the wind would come in, and that will be harmful to the bundle of the flax, so lo megalile. So you do not have to be afraid that I'm going to open up the oven to stir the coals, to hasten the process of the flax becoming whitened. The Gemara says is because the wind would not be good for the flax, and therefore you don't have to worry he's going to open the oven while the oven is on. So therefore, the Gemara says there's no problem of the stoking of the coals. So the Gemara says, similarly, if you take wool and you put it into a boiling pot of dye, right? And you want
wait, Rabbi, go back for a second. If we're worried that the wind is going to hurt the coals,
no, not the coals. The wind is going to hurt the bundles of flax. It'll be detrimental to the bundles of flax. That the wind, if you put bundles of flax and you want it, you want that the heat of the oven should go ahead and clean it. So during that process, if you open the coldness or the coolness or whatever it is of the wind, that will have a negative effect on the bundles of flax, and therefore you will not open the oven
to stoke the coals.
To stoke the coals, exactly. So the Gemara says, so what about the case when you have the pot of boiling dyes on a fire, and you want the wool to absorb the color of those dyes? So you place the wool, right, Simon, into the pot. So the Mishnah stated, Beit Hillel says, you could place before Shabbat, right before Shabbat, you could go ahead and place wool and wool into a boiling pot of dye, and you're good. But the Gemara's understanding, where is the pot if you want the wool to absorb the color of the dye, it has to be very hot. And therefore, it's very hot. The Gemara's understanding it's on a fire. It's on a fire, so maybe why don't we afraid that might want to stoke the coals, and you'll
every day. You'll see me every day.
Say it again.
Come on.
So that is the Gemara's question. Why did Beit Hillel say you could place the wool into that boiling pot of dye to absorb the color of the dye. Now, you should be afraid you're going to stoke the coals. Stoking coals, by the way, is make the fire larger on Shabbat. That is malacha on Shabbat. That is a forbidden act. So the Gemara says, we're talking about, you're right. If the pot would be on the fire, then it would be a problem. But where is this pot? The pot, we're talking about, if it's a boiling pot of dye, you could place it in before Shabbat. Just take the pot off the fire. We're talking, if you take the pot off the fire before Shabbat, and you put the wool into this boiling pot, you're good. That's what we're talking about, because there's no coals to stoke, because it is off the fire. It's not on top of the fire. So the Gemara says a little bit what morning that Mark was mentioned yesterday, asked about yesterday. What about he might stir? He might stir the pot, for the dyes to absorb its, you have a boiling pot. You put in the wool, but you might go ahead and stir it. And then if you stir it, if you do that on Shabbat, we're at 18b1. And if you stir it, you're going to help the process of the dyeing process, because you're going to make it much faster. So therefore, you are being active on Shabbat. So why aren't we afraid that he's going to go ahead and do that? See, there is a question. I explained, this is how Tosfos explains, because you're going to hasten the process of the dyeing. But others explain that the issue is, if you're going to stir the pot with the wool and the dye, it's like cooking the item by making the wool, now get the dye absorbed into it. So what did you? So what is that? Is that cooking? What do you do? So either it's you cooked it, meaning that lukewarm item or that part that wasn't really getting it. Now you brought it to a higher temperature. Maybe you brought it to a temperature of cooking that it might not have been cooked, or you're actually helping the dyeing process, and you're actually dyeing. There's one of two, or maybe either way, it's no good. It's a problem, exactly. However, you're going to identify the problem, it's going to be a problem. So the Gemara says, why aren't you afraid that maybe you're going to mix this thing in order to help the process? The Gemara says, Bakura v'tucha. Again, so what are we talking about? Not only did you go ahead and remove the boiling pot of dye from the fire, and then put in the wool subsequently, you actually taped close. You put around the cover of the pot some sort of seal. You sealed it with something, and that you don't have to be afraid that you're going to go ahead and on Shabbat you're going to go ahead and remove that, because you're going to catch yourself. Meaning, a lot of the concern is, you made your own gedei, your own fence, your own gedei. You made your own fence. So usually a person, when you don't have a fence, you can forget, and you stir the coal, or you forget. How long does it take to go ahead and make a fast? I just mixed it. What you do, it's Shabbat. You forgot Shabbat. You can't do that. So he put on he has a cover on top of the pot. He sealed. He put something around the cover to to keep it closed. It's like they said they put some sort of clay or some sort of mud, a seal. Now that takes time to remove. by the time you remove it, you already catch yourself. It's Shabbat. I can't do it. So therefore, we're not afraid when you have such a, such a reminder, such a thing that when you place that clay around the cover. So now you don't have to be afraid he's gonna forget, and he's gonna open it up and he's gonna mix it around. No, if the beans will be in the oven, the Gemara is saying it should have been. The Gemara had a question. The Gemara says, "What is the reason for that?" So the Gemara says that you could say it is because of stoking. That is the problem. I mean, the Gemara originally said it's because of the right. So technically, according to this Gemara, if you do something in a way, you create a scenario. If you do certain things, that will be a certain type of.
I have a good idea. Do it on Sunday.
Okay, that's the way to do it. So do it on Sunday. Get him avoid the whole thing, right? But exactly, if you would create based on this Gemara, right? Because you might come. Right. Exactly. That's what the Gemara is interested. What do you mean? Explain. And right, why? Because the only reason why they allow it. Right. That is the difference. It's all about the stove. The Gemara. Right. Oh, so you're asking the question. Okay, maybe it's not as you're asking. Mark is asking the question. Equal. They shouldn't be listed as separate. Okay, so this Breita. So according to what we're saying over here, we have two different Breitos, right? Right. So after Shabbat. Okay, so what Mark is asking, let me tell you what Mark is asking. The Gemara is now saying it's all about the stoking, and the Gemara is creating situations. One situation where you're not worried about the stoking, one is. But you shouldn't call them separate if they're all about the same issue. If they would be in the yes, because you're going to catch yourself. If you seal the pot, you're going to catch yourself.
I'm stirring.
No, we're talking about the pot is off the fire. There's two things happen, the Gemara says. The pot is off the fire. So you're not near the coals. But the Gemara says there's a different concern. You're not near the coals, but maybe you'll stir it. To address the stirring problem. Right, exactly. Fire deals with the stoking. Exactly. Okay, so now that's what Mark, right? So let's address Mark's thing. There are two different statements. It's not all in the same Breita. They're all in the same statement. Then Mark's question would be a great question. Why should we create different scenarios if it's all about the sealing? It's all the same. But one case is the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, where the Mishnah is emphasizing the argument of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel on whether your utensils could work for you on Shabbat or not. That's what that Mishnah was coming to address. And Beit Shammai says your utensils can't work for you on Shabbat. He doesn't care even if all other issues don't apply. Your utensils can't work. There's no stogum, but no. That's what our mission, and that's where the case, Mark, of the dye is. That's where that case was mentioned. So therefore you could say there's no issue. That Mishnah was not discussing concerns about stoking and stirring. The only issue that Mishnah was the only issue on the table is using utensil. However, because that is what the Breita is talking about Sorry, that's what the Mishnah is dealing with. Is there do your utensils have to rest on Shabbat or not? This case with the beans, it's because because we're introducing a different issue. Exactly. Now we're introducing the stoking the coals issue. The Mishnah was only, meaning we never had got to this before. This, we've been learning about utensils resting for your chest. Nathan, they're not together, meaning they were taught separately. No, they're not. The Gemara brings it. One is a Mishnah and one's a Breita. Two different worlds, meaning that they're similar time periods, but each thing is coming to tell us a different law of Shabbat. This the Breita with the beans is introducing a new concept, and the Breita with the beans is even Beit Hillel will agree. Beit Hillel in the Mishnah that says your utensils could work for you, but now, and he's going to argue on Beit Shammai, but now then comes the Breita and says, I want to tell you, Beit Hillel there's a new thing that you got to worry about. That sometime, and this new thing called stoking the coals, Beit Hillel will agree to that concern. Even though he's the more lenient opinion when it comes to utensils resting on Shabbat, but that's when there's no issue of stoking the coals. The question, no, they don't. Right, that's what the Gemara says. Right, it wasn't really changing gears. It was a question. Because once you, Beit Hillel, introduced to me the problem with the beans, and you're telling me what's the problem with the beans? Because you might stoke those coals. So now what? So how do you say in the Mishnah you can have the dye going? How could you go ahead and have that the wool in that boiling hot pot? Maybe you're going to stoke it. That meaning if you introduce the problem of stoking of the coals. That's the Gemara's question. What's going on, Beit Hillel? You're not being consistent. If you're worried about stoking, so why aren't you worried about? Why do you allow putting the wool in the pot before Shabbat? What? Because there wasn't that concern. That's what the Gemara is going to say. Because that case of the Mishnah, which we weren't worried about that issue, because that wasn't an issue. You dealt with that issue. It was off the fire. Wait, what about the stirring? You sealed it. That issue didn't apply. But Beit Hillel. Right. Right. But Beit Hillel here is introducing to us this new concept that we did not know about Beit Hillel, that he's worried about this concern of stoking coals. You would have said maybe we're not so concerned. Maybe. Why would we? Because the Mishnah he was only addressing, right, because he wasn't discussing, because he wanted to focus on his argument with Shammai. Do my utensils have to rest on Shabbat? That was really what he was trying to. He was only addressing that issue in the Mishnah. Doesn't mean that it exists. Might not have been an issue. But the Mishnah was only focused on Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, do my utensils have to rest on Shabbat. But now the Breita, the Breita originally thought that maybe the author is also Beit Shammai with the beans, that you can't use the beans, can't put the beans on before Shabbat and leave it for 24 hours. Right. But now the Gemara says, he's addressing yesterday's point. Very good, Nate. But we still need to research that, right? But okay, I apologize. Give me another 24 hours. Okay. By the way, I'm going to be going to Israel. Me too. I'm going tomorrow but I'll be here for the class, and I'm going to have Rabbi Kanarik cover the class like he did last year. Next Thursday morning. I'm going to be doing recruitment. Next Thursday.
Why don't you do it from Israel?
Beautiful man. I have a lot of naha. And but the class is going to go on, and we're going to expect everybody to be here. not to miss a beat, right? We want to make sure that the class will stoking along, right? You got to have the fire going, the Esha Torah. So let's just continue. So, but this is the Gemara originally thought that Beit Shammai was the author of the beans because your utensils are working on Shabbat. And then the Gemara says, no, it's Beit Hillel. It's Beit Hillel's, he's the man that would agree that there's a problem of the stoking of the coals. So the Gemara says, now that you have introduced that now we're going to address that raw pot of meat before Shabbat. So the raw pot of meat before Shabbat, you could put on before Shabbat, right before Shabbat, because you're not going to stoke the coals because it's not going to be ready Friday night. You're not eating it for Friday night. It's not going to be ready Friday night. Stoking the coals won't even get it ready Friday night, that raw pot of meat. You're not interested in you don't want a Friday night. Technically, the Gemara is saying you could take a raw pot of meat, it has plug in, and it's not going to be ready. It's not you're not going to eat it till tomorrow. It's not going to be ready now and soon. So therefore, there wouldn't be a concern. Right, so that might be a concern. But if you cover it, if you cover up, if you cover up the blech, we'll see more. We're going to learn the Gemaras about it. But once you cover up the fire, you have a blech on top of the fire. That's going to stop you from, what's the concern? You might come to stoke it. But if you cover it up, that's going to prevent you from stoking. So that would be a way to deal with food that was not, you create a scenario, we'll see more about it. That should be a way to create a scenario. A bless, that should take away that problem. We'll see more about it. We'll see as we go, but according to this, what we're saying, theoretically, it sounds like there's no concern.
Very fast.
Right.
If I started before Shabbat and it cooks on Shabbat,
it's already ready very soon.
Very soon.
But the question is, if you have this blech, then that should stop. It shouldn't be the concern of stoking the coals. Like we said, the best thing is here is turning up the fire. Our stoking coals today is turning the knob. So you have to see if turning the knob. That's one of the ways of stoking the coals today. Okay, we'll see. We're gonna have to learn more about it.
The best bet is not to put yourself in this position in the first place.
Right. Cook everything completely before Shabbat. If you completely cook by the time Shabbat comes, then you avoid